Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today with our partners from Suffolk University MBA program. My name is Lloyd Edmondson, and I'm the Client Development Director at Austral Group and have been in that role since day one, actually, back in 2005. So that really explains all the grey hair after 15 years of working in travel and education. And I'm really pleased to be here today with my colleague, Mariana.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Mariana Hezendi. I'm the Strategic Partnerships Director at Austral. I'm based in Brazil. No gray hairs, but I have been with the company for the past 6 years, and it's a pleasure to be here. Jody and Carlos, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Hi. Thank you. I am Jody Detchen. I am the MBA Program Director at Suffolk University in downtown Boston. I'm also a professor of management where I teach both undergrad and grad. And I'm not speaking anything about gray hairs. Carlos.
Hi, Carlos Rufin. I'm a professor of international business and strategy at the Sawyer Business School at Suffolk University in Boston. And I'm here in my role as designer, co-designer, and instructor of the virtual course that we're going to be talking about.
Great. Well, look, I'd like to mention that Jody and I first had our conversation about the online MBA consultant initiative several months before COVID kicked off. So in reality, I actually owe a debt of gratitude to Suffolk MBA team for giving Austral Group a head start against COVID for virtual only consulting modules. When MBA students were considering global in-person consulting modules in the past, they had the allure of scenery in Rio de Janeiro. They had wonderful architecture in Lisbon and cuisine in Lima to attract them to those modules, as well as the academic challenge. But our webinar today will hopefully provide a little insight into how Suffolk and Austral are developing our modules to ensure that these experiences online are as exciting and successful as the in-person travel modules. So what we'll be covering today is we'll kick it off with a little bit of context of how Suffolk and Austral got started from day one. I'll then pass over the mic to Jody and Carlos to describe a little bit about the MBA program profile and how global fits within their overall course curriculum. Marianne and I will then take the mic back again to give a little bit of a description of the methodology and the systems that we've put in place to respond to our university client experiential learning needs. And then we get into the really meaty part of the webinar where Carlos is going to describe how he designed this course, the student deliverables, how we engaged with the client, how we've developed this over time. And then we'll finish off with a short section about how schools can also consider shorter, sharper duration modules, which we call fast track business challenges, as an alternative to the longer duration consulting modules. And we're hoping there should be about 15 to 20 minutes at the end for a Q&A with us. And we'd love to hear best practices in the industry. We're all here with the same end client, which is the MBA student. So hopefully we can have a nice interactive discussion at the end. So let me just kick it off with how it all started, the magic. So in 2012, Austral Group ran our first executive MBA study trip with Suffolk. And since that point of time, we've partnered in 5 different countries, I think now, and multiple different program formats and across various different MBA program levels with Suffolk. During this period of time, the group sizes have varied between 15 to 30 students on average, and the modules were lasting in a travel format between 6 to 8 days. Now, after those first few years working on Latin America, our California team was thrilled in 2017 to partner with Jody on the fast track business challenge module, which was called the Flash Consulting module there, which was focused on Silicon Valley. And it was particularly interesting for their international students. But then following a couple of years of collaboration on that module, back in August, the costs were escalating in San Francisco, and Jody and I had a very frank conversation together about how can we make this work, Jody? And especially for your online MBA students, is there an opportunity to bring an online consulting module without any travel at all? And so our relationship with Suffolk University has evolved throughout these years, and we truly consider Suffolk as a partner. And I hope Jodie and Carlos view us at Austral in the same way.
Definitely.
So I thought I'd turn it over now just to Jodie to give a bit of context on the MBA profile there at Suffolk University.
Yeah, so I want to just talk about, well, next slide, thank you. So we have a pretty robust program, about 300 students on campus, another 83 and growing online. And the one thing that we really pride ourselves on is that our online program is the exact same curriculum and taught by the exact same professors as our on-campus students. And our on-campus students often take our online classes with the online students. So we really don't have this separation of on-campus and online. When we redid our curriculum back in 2016, one of the key ingredients that we decided to include was this idea of a travel course. We wanted students to have this immersion, and this immersion enables them to see the world and really practice their skills in a different way, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. But we've been doing these for a long time, but we made it core and essential to our travel program. When we went fully online back in, well, we actually expanded our online. We've been fully online since 1999, but we've expanded our online program. We needed to have this comparable travel course for online students where they didn't have to travel. So our online students still can travel abroad if they want, or they can take this intensive, which we'll talk about in a minute. And so in 2020, and Carlos is going to really go into a deep dive of this, we designed this course with that goal in mind. And it's beautiful because now in times of COVID, we're actually going to be able to use this because clearly we're not doing as much travel this year as we would have historically. So let me tell you a little bit about where we are in the curriculum with this process. Next slide, please, Mariana. So we've really got 4 key ingredients to our program. The first one is this idea of contextualization, where we really ground students both in the concept of these clusters and how companies want to work near other companies that are similar to them. And we use Boston as the example. And we give students this introduction to what this means to be in a cluster and all the different economic, macroeconomic aspects, as well as some of the very key networking aspects of it as well. We also, of course, have an Understand Business Fundamentals, which is all about the core ingredients of a business degree. You've heard all marketing, finance, all that kind of good stuff. And then the Construct Big Picture stage is where we actually start to think more strategically about what does a strategy look like. And this is where we do our travel course. So we do our travel course sort of in the middle of an MBA program so that students have this opportunity to take all the lessons that they've learned prior and really implement them in this very intense format. So when they're traveling, it's every day for 6 days. When they're online, it's in a 7-week format, but it's intense. So they're getting this opportunity to work with one client or multiple clients and practice and practice and practice. And we do a lot of debrief, which we'll talk about in a minute, that actually enables the students to take their skill set from here to here. So this is a key ingredient. We actually designed our program this way. And another key ingredient is this idea of our travel classes are really global. So we have, of course, as everybody does, a lot of international students. So we have some US-based travel courses for them. And then for other students, we really push them to go abroad, whether that's to Germany or South America or Singapore. And so therefore, students get this intense experience from a different perspective altogether. And then at the end of the MBA program, we really work on this idea of change, which is of course ubiquitous. We're all experiencing it right now, and we give students the skill set to be able to do it. So our travel experience, our immersion experience, is sort of at the center point of our program. Lloyd. I think you're muted.
Yeah, so now you've heard a little bit about the Suffolk MBA profile. I'll give you a big picture view on Austral Group's destination and product mix. So we commenced operations in Santiago, Chile in 2005, and Austral Group spent the first decade focused solely on Latin America. And we opened up subsidiaries, as you can see on the map here, across various major hubs in Latin America. But then, in response to the increasing importance of digital transformation and innovation for MBA students, in 2014, we opened our Silicon Valley office. And from there, we plan a lot of our Boston, New York, Seattle modules. And last but not least, we felt it was important to provide even more diversity of topics and destinations. And so back in 2019, we took that big leap into Spain and Portugal. And I'm happy to say that in light of the success of the modules that we ran there pre-pandemic, we have decided as a company to continue our expansion into other Western European countries. And so whenever it's safe and efficient to travel again, we'll be ready. In terms of Austral Group's client base, we're really proud to have worked with roughly 212 universities and particularly business schools worldwide. About 3/4 of these universities are from North America and Western Europe. But in recent years, we've witnessed an increasing diversity of cultures amongst our client base. And we've been engaging on experiential learning programs with Singapore, Hong Kong, South Africa. And I absolutely love that because we're bringing in tons of new ideas and opinions and networks that will only benefit everybody amongst our network. So yeah, it's been very exciting to have that expansion of the cultures that we're working with ourselves. And I'd say from very early on in Austral Group's development, we identified student consulting as a core product. And we actually ran our first consulting module in 2009, believe it or not, for Newcastle University to Chile. And since then, we haven't looked back. We've hosted over 4,000, sorry, I wish it was 400,000, 4,000 MBA students on these consulting modules. But we have specialized in MBA and executive MBA experiences in particular. And they've taught us some very key lessons over the years. I'd say the first major lesson is that interaction with C-level executives and project liaisons is imperative. And as such, we're pretty proud that 85% of our project liaisons that engage with our student teams in a consulting module are normally from the C-suite or hopefully the founders of the company. And then as we've been seeing the planning of these online experiences increase in the last 4 to 5 months, student demands are definitely evolving, and we're noticing that there's a cross-continent, industry-wide consulting project need now, and they're almost as important as the country-specific projects themselves. So that might mean that Mariana and her team are sourcing a supply chain project from Panama City, Rotterdam, and Chicago. Another aspect that we've learned is that MBA students truly love the projects that are helping companies facing difficult situations, difficult economic, political, social environments in their home countries, as well as challenging industry-wide conditions. One example are the student teams right now that are working on projects in Argentina, right? Can you believe that inflation has been hovering around 53% in Argentina? And imagine then a scenario of a consulting team working on a pricing strategy project with those kind of conditions. So the students are getting a lot of exposure to challenging environments, which is that they're really enjoying. And then I'd say that the final kind of third important element for us, which is driving the success of these modules, is to make sure that we can provide ample choice of project type, industry, country, company size, so that the actual consultant engagement is a really good fit for each student's own career goals or progression, each faculty member's course objectives, and then the overall MBA curriculum core learning goals. And we wouldn't be here today without our talented experiential learning team. So I think this is a good moment for me to be quiet and pass the mic over to Mariana Hezendi.
Well, thank you, Lloyd. Ensuring a constant flow of consulting projects in a wide range of sectors has been our latest key priority. And this is where our new experiential learning platform and team comes into play. Let's start with our team. The team was created to focus on a few main areas. The first and most important one is forming long-lasting partnerships with the business community around the world to ensure a constant flow of new projects and partners arriving at the educational platform at all times. Second is the matching of students' skill sets, like Jody mentioned, and expectations to the needs of the company and project. Our experiential learning showcase event that we had last August was an example of that. We organized for 25 companies to meet simultaneously with over 200 business school directors to discuss their project scope and industry needs. We'll do something similar in November with Endeavor and other associations too. Measuring the impact of our experiences has also been fundamental. And we have been doing that together with the university and corporate partners through checkpoints on both ends before, during, and after the engagements are over. Very important to mention as well is that we recognize that MBA students have an incredible support customer service on your team. And we try to replicate that during our consulting modules, which means that sometimes in addition, we'll offer translation surveys, or we're going to do surveys, market surveys with local consumers for student teams. Everything that we can do to help and support. But I have been talking a lot about our educational platform, so I feel it's time that I show it to you a little bit. Don't worry, because we'll send you the links and you will be able to create an account and search for projects after this webinar is over. But to the platform. Once you register and you log in, this is what your dashboard looks like. So if I come here on search projects, you can find our database. You can use the filters here at the top to narrow your search. So maybe you want to focus on the organization type that you're looking for, or maybe the type of project, or even the industry that you're looking into. Or maybe you want to focus on the region. So let's try and find some projects here, shall we? Let's say that we want to find some projects in Europe. So on the search here, you can see some of our projects. Here, this first one that you see, they're a chocolate maker from France. They're a family-owned company, and we actually have two projects with them. One focused on B2B and another one on a B2C. Let's click here on the B2C project and check out the details. So here on the details page, you can see the organizational profile, you can see the description of the project, the deliverables, and once you go through the entire project and you decide, oh, this is something that I'm interested in, you can actually click here and add it to your shortlist, to your favorite projects. So if I go to my dashboard right now, I can actually see the projects that I mentioned. So here we are with the chocolate maker. One important thing to mention as well is that inside of our database, we have different projects with different tags. So for this first project that you see here, you see Fast Track Challenge and Consulting Project. This means that this project can accept two types of different engagements, right? So we have the Fast Track, we can also have a hackathon, for example. So it changes and varies, right? One interesting thing is that Carlos was actually able to use the platform to pre-select his projects for our program that we're running right now. And Carlos, do you want to talk a little bit about this process and how you actually selected these projects?
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Mariana. As you can see, this database is extremely user-friendly, very easy to use. I imagine most of you are, or all of you must be used to these kind of searchable databases that we use to find materials for our courses, for example. So this is no different. It allows you to search on these various criteria that Mariana showed you. And with this, it was extremely easy to identify several possibilities for a project for the course. In my particular case, I was fairly open about projects, but I wanted to make sure that they would be, first of all, of a consulting nature, because we were looking for an engagement with the client that would last over the 7-week frame of the course, but also that the project would be of a more integrative nature. So rather than projects focused on a particular field, such as marketing or finance, I was looking for something more of a strategy or general international business, because that's the nature of the type of experience that we want the students to have in this class. We're bringing students who are interested in different kinds of fields. and we want them to be able to integrate different types of knowledge. So that was a second criterion. And then the third one, I looked in particular for industries that would resonate with students in other countries. Since I was looking for companies in the southern cone of Latin America, sometimes it's possible that there are industries that are highly specialized. For example, Chile has a very strong mining sector, but mining is only, say, in the US, in New England, where a lot of our students come from, it's not so common, and few students are probably likely to follow a career in mining. So I look for projects in industries that would have that would resonate well with the students, that the students could identify with, that could see even as a future career path, or could be an issue, industries that deal with issues that are important emerging issues for business. So in a particular case for this semester, I found a company that works in waste management and environmental management, which I think is an issue that more and more companies are caring for as they consider their environmental, social, and governance impacts, or as they were pressured by regulation and by stakeholders to do a better job of managing their environmental streams. So that worked out very easily, and then it was a very straightforward process of working with Mariana and her team to then contact the company and finalize the project, which we'll talk about in a moment when we discuss the next steps. So Mariana, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Carlos. So like we were talking about, there are different formats that we use for this project. So once the course structure was in place, the major decision that Carlos and I discussed was whether to make this program a combination of business challenge or an in-depth consulting project, whichever would work best. Second, we had to think about if this should be a consulting experience focusing on one major project with a large scope or multiple projects with a reduced scope. So, Carlos, can you comment a little bit on why we chose the consulting format for this latest program that we're running?
Yes, this was an important departure for us from the kind of travel courses that Jody described earlier, where we would have our students visiting a particular site, Silicon Valley or Brazil or Germany, for a typically 1 week period and a very intensive schedule of visits to companies on different days. So for that type of approach, the business challenge mode that you see here would be the most appropriate one, the one that we would use, because of the nature of the timing. Makes it necessary to follow this very intensive kind of engagement with the client over a short period of time. When it came to coming up with this virtual version of a travel course, we wanted, as you will see later, as I'll explain later, we followed the kind of format that we are using for our new online offering, which takes place over a period of 7 weeks. So it's shorter than a typical MBA course, but it's longer than a typical travel course. So taking into account the fact that we had this opportunity for a deeper engagement with a client, we chose to go with the consulting, to depart from the pattern in these courses and go instead with this consulting approach, which would be closer to what we do in a lot of our regular MBA courses, because this would allow us a deeper engagement with the client and therefore a more nuanced and deeper form of learning on the part of the students, and the possibility of creating also maybe greater or deeper value for the client as a result of this more extended engagement with the students. And of course, this is something that we are proceeding. We are still relatively new in terms of the launch of this virtual version, so we may revisit it in the future. I've actually also used the other approach when COVID forced us to change the way, to essentially not run our travel courses on site, but do them online, virtually, with Austral's very quick turnaround to help us with this. And that worked also very well. So it is very much possible to do a 1 week highly intensive experience online with the business challenges, and it works beautifully. But for this course that, again, follows our 7 week format, this deeper engagement with one or maybe a few clients seems to work very well in terms of helping the students build up their skill set and their ability to craft a more extended project with the client.
And perhaps, Mariana, perhaps you could show on the previous slide kind of the way the grading was set for this particular course, because I know that that was slightly different, right, Carlos, in this sense?
Yes, yes. So that thank you, Lloyd. That was something that also changed to, in the structure of the course. Is that in a typical travel course that would last for 1 week, as you can imagine, the client project engagement was a very big part of the grade, because that's where the bulk of the student effort in the course comes in, is through those daily engagements with clients. And perhaps the individual participation would also have a significant weight there. In this case, being something that is extending over a 7-week period, where we have the opportunity to introduce other kinds of forms of engagement of the client, of the students, with the types of skills that we want them to build over the course, it allows us to give a more diversified grading structure, maybe closer to what you would see in a typical MBA course. So although the client project, as you see, is still is 1/3 of the course grade, is still very, very prominent. We also introduced what we call a local engagement analysis. We also thought about creating a small project that would require the students to look at how people in their own community navigate cultural differences, particularly taking advantage of the diversity that we have in the US, therefore the opportunities that are for the students. But also if you think about Western Europe, that's also increasingly the case. Have the students find somebody locally that they could learn from about addressing cultural differences and cultural intelligence. Then we have a variety of assignments whose role I will explain shortly, because they have to do a lot with the learning progression of the course. We also have online discussions, and this is of course very much I think part and parcel of online offerings as a means of encouraging learning through peer-to-peer interaction. And then we still have certainly the individual engagement. We still want to make sure that students have an incentive to be engaged, to participate, and to reward that individual engagement throughout the course in all the various activities that they are pursuing.
Perfect. Thank you, Carlos. And here we have the final schedule that we settled on for the consulting programs that we ran with Suffolk this year. So our first consulting program was with Insisti, a Brazilian company focused on aerospace and technology, whose challenge involved a US go-to-market strategy to their do-it-yourself kits, where kids can learn how to assemble, integrate, and test small satellites. And just last week, we had our initial call with Recilink, a Chilean startup, like Carlos mentioned, who, according to themselves, are a recycling Netflix. They created a platform that connects industries with recycling and sustainable waste management companies. And Carlos, I remember that when we were first discussing what we were looking for in terms of projects, we talked a lot about the industries that you felt made sense for the group. Do you think you can walk us through a little bit of this process?
Yes, well, as I mentioned earlier, we were looking for industries that would resonate with the students, that would have the students would find a relevance, because I'm particularly in an online setting. I guess for me was very prominent to make sure that there is an engagement of the students, that the students are well engaged, and this was one of the ways we could do that. So we looked at a variety of industries that met this criteria. And the one, and in this case, environmentally related types of companies and sectors made a lot of sense for the reasons that I mentioned earlier about the increasing prominence of these kinds of issues that many companies are facing around the world, both from a regulatory point of view, but also from stakeholder pressure point of view. And what I thought in this case was a very innovative product that this company had developed, and therefore it's something that was combined. These kind of contextual pressure that many companies are facing on this question of their waste management and their environmental impact, with what seemed to be a very innovative platform or information-based platform that could very well be developed here in the U.S. in Boston or on the West Coast, for example.
Great, thank you, Carlos. Oh, sorry, here we go. Okay, and I wanted to show you some of the platforms that we have been using during our experiential learning modules as well. Let's start with Slack. So for a few programs, Austral has been using Slack so that each student team and their client company have an exclusive Slack channel to validate information and communicate on the project progress. These channels provide full transparency for individual student participation levels for faculty members, and it allows all parties to see if the response times and interactions is matching with the expectations. This exposure to new system has also been appreciated by students. On the other hand, we have been using Hopping for our largest events. In Hopping, we can create fun cultural experiences like tango lessons or cooking class or even samba dancing. But also, it is a place where we can host company meetings simultaneously, like we did in our experiential learning event. And Carlos, do you want to talk a little bit about Basecamp as well that we have been using for the programs?
Yes, as you'll see, one of the elements that we built into this 7-week version of the course was an idea of a project management. I'll talk a bit more about that, but it was meant to be just simply helping students build the skill set of engaging in client projects successfully. And part of that obviously involves organizing effectively and communicating effectively with the client. So for that purpose, we wanted a platform that would contain some elements of project management, but at the same time was not a professional project management type of platform, which can get extremely complex. And it's not something we wanted to not an additional barrier, if you will, that we wanted to create for this course. So we found in Basecamp something that provides some basic elements that allow the students to organize themselves, helps them develop that skill of taking a project, identifying the key tasks, communicating with the client, keeping the client informed of what's going on, and facilitating that kind of communication, and also organizing themselves internally as a team in order to allocate tasks and work more effectively. So Basecamp is one of many probably that could be found, but it's not very complicated. It's a very fast learning curve, so the students and the client can easily familiarize themselves with it because it's very intuitive, and it's available for us free of charge for academic users. So that's also a consideration, and it serves well the purpose of helping the students learn how to engage effectively in a project of this nature and work effectively as a team to deliver a valuable product at the end of the project timeline.
Thank you, Carlos. And I wanted to take a moment to talk about our cross-cultural experiences as well. These cultural experiences were always a huge component of our global immersions. Not only are they fun and engaging, but through them, we are able to show the local cultures and personality. For example, Carnival and Samba in Brazil speak to the nature of Brazilian society and how it permeates into our business culture. Also, inviting the corporate project sponsors to these social and cultural activities can help form a strong bond and trust. Like, for example, when we invited Marcelo, the CEO of Insisti, to our cross-cultural workshop with Mariana Barros, and students were given the opportunity to validate information and ask questions relating to the way Brazilians do business. Now, to finish off, I want to invite Carlos to talk about the final reflection piece.
Thank you, Mariana. This is a very important part of the of our approach at Suffolk about the way we've always run these travel courses, and this was going to be no exception. We want to make sure that the students are learning throughout their entire experience or involvement in the course. There is a learning progression across the course, and we do not just leave it to the end. And this is, of course, it was particularly obvious when we run on-site courses. We take the students for 1 week, and there's the risk of that you're so much engaged in these client visits, you're so intense that you don't take time to reflect. You will leave it until you come back, and by the time you come back, it's harder. Definitely, a lot of the important lessons are already dimming a little bit. So we want to make sure that that wouldn't happen. The way we did that in this course, though, was a little different. Whereas Jody will talk a little bit in a moment about the process of debriefing that we use. But what we did in the virtual version is that we have taken advantage of the possibility of using a variety of tools for student learning and self-reflection. And we have applied those tools and applied them across the 7-week period. So the students are engaged in this process of self-reflection from week 1 all the way to the end of the course, where of course we do at the end, we do a peer evaluation, we do a team debriefing of how the project went, but that's not the only, those are not the only exercises. There's self-reflection and exercises on leadership, on project management, cultural intelligence, all the various aspects that you see here, and we do them through a variety of means. They can be a discussion board, it can be some type of guided questionnaire, it can be a kind of survey where the students have to rate their own learning, and they can see their scores relative to the scores of their teammates. So a variety of means that keep the students engaged and show them how much they're learning, make them reflect in a variety of ways. Now, the other side that of this whole aspect of feedback is, of course, the question of getting the clients to provide feedback. And this one, in my experience, at least, has been more difficult because the clients are obviously very busy. They have many priorities, and although they value a lot of these experiences, there are probably other priorities that take over once the students are gone. So it is difficult to get them to devote a lot of time to these. And there are, of course, cultural barriers as well. There are cultures where providing critical feedback is more difficult. It's just culturally not the norm, or it comes therefore in a very nuanced way that may be difficult for the students to fully understand. So taking into account those factors, what we have done over the years is to take a clue, frankly, from many consumer goods industries where the feedback, the most important feedback from the customer is that they want to come back. And that's what we try to do. We say, well, if we are able to repeat the experience with the same client, that means that the client saw some value in the prior interaction with us. So that's already an important form of feedback. And we can even upgrade that relationship to other opportunities, say, for example, internships for our students. That then is another indicator of value for us that helps us get a sense of whether we are doing a good job in these projects that we are developing with the clients. So that's something that we've tried to do over the years, and in some cases it's worked very well with the clients that we have visited for 4 or 5 times, and where the relationship has also expanded over time in scope to include some of these additional opportunities. But let me turn it over to Jody, who will also talk about this part of the course design process.
Yeah, we made it integral to the MBA, and it's actually done in multiple classes, but we really make it intense at the business immersion class, because this idea, which Carlos mentioned, of reflection, and so it's this metacognition piece where students can actually step outside of their experience and start to think about what happened to me when I was with that client, and maybe I didn't speak the way I wanted to speak. Okay, I noticed that, right? And now I understand the skill sets or what I did wrong or how I can improve it. So it's this chance to step back. And so they do this at an individual level, but they also do it at a team level. So the cool part about it is they can also talk about their teams. So we try to give them the language so that they can have these kinds of discussions. Sometimes with their teams, it gets kind of messy. I mean, you've all, I'm sure, experienced the messy team project. And so we try to give them the opportunity to have the discussion that they wouldn't normally want to have. And so we look at this as a skill set in and of itself. And so debrief is core to what we do and how we help students learn. Mariana.
Well, thank you, Jody. On one last note, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the alternative experiential learning formats that we have and the Fast Track Challenge. Because not all business schools have the time in their curriculum to do consulting. So for these cases, the Fast Track Challenge format is a better fit. The schedule that you see here was designed as a replacement to a canceled travel module that was due to go to Argentina and Chile in May of this year. It involved a very compressed and intensive 5 days of interactions with 4 different companies in very different industries.
Mariana, let me just pop in here, because I think
yes.
this was like Carlos on winging it, sort of saying, okay, we're not traveling. What the heck are we going to do? It was COVID explosion. And so the cool part is we had this great partnership with Austral. Carlos checked the, talked to them, and they came up with this, and it just worked out incredibly. And I'll tell you, the students loved it because it was substantive, it was real. Yeah, of course they wanted to go to South America, but they also got that they couldn't, and they still got this experience that was rich. It wasn't this, oh, listen to Carlos talk and you're a secret. It wasn't that at all. It was real, and they had these challenges, and it was messy. And I think that the power of this flexibility and adaptability in the moment is so essential. And I know that's something that we really pride ourselves here at Suffolk, and I know that's something we really find in Austral as well, to be able to figure out how to create something that is still meeting the learning objectives, but not just meeting them, really exceeding them and giving the students this experience that they would, they would not have gotten otherwise. Thanks, Mariana.
Thank you, Jody. I couldn't have said better myself. Okay. So, Lloyd, do you want to take over?
Yeah, well, I think at this stage we're getting close, right, Jeff, to the last 13 minutes. We want to make sure we can attend to any questions that the audience has. And I don't know there, Jeff, if you've got some of those questions in the chat box, and if not, we'll come up with some of our own questions for the audience. But yeah, we'd love to hear if anyone has any doubts at all that we can answer in the next 13 minutes.
Sure, I think I'm just checking you can all hear me. I'm going to keep my camera off, but a quick question, and I guess you all can answer it. It's just some clarification about which of the programs that you were talking about were online and which were not online. So that was one of the questions that we got.
Yeah, so the last 2 programs, the programs we've been talking about today, were both online programs, the Fast Track Challenge and the Consulting module.
Great, great. I guess a question for Jody and Carlos. Can you talk about what probably will remain in terms of your planning for the future, your future experiential learning programs?
So it's funny because we're tackling this question now, and of course most of our travel happens in the spring semester simply because of spring break and just the timing. But I will tell you that we're really struggling with this because we really find that the travel portion is so rich and so important to student learning. And for our students in particular, especially the ones that are US based, it really gives them this opportunity to get outside their comfort zone, and it creates this learning that's powerful. So we're trying to figure out how to create an online experience for those students without giving them a way out of having this difficult experience too. So we're playing with it, and I don't have an answer for you yet. We're trying to figure out what this looks like, what this feels like. But what I love about it is that what we've worked with, what we've created here, what Carlos and Mariana have designed is something that gives us so much flexibility. So I'll give you an example. I lead the travel course to Silicon Valley, which we're not doing in the spring. And so I'm going to run Carlos's designed course in the spring, another section of it, because we just need to have that flexibility. So I have a feeling that we're still going to continue to do this moving forward. And of course, we'll always have the online version, but I will say it's to be decided. I'd love to hear if other people have some thoughts on this as well.
Great. Here's a question. What were the business challenge questions you might provide to students during the Fast Track Challenge? I can repeat that if that makes sense.
Sure, that makes sense. Yeah, I can take that, Jeff. there's a wide variety. I mean, generally it's a process of negotiation, with Mariana and her team, and then the prospective clients, in terms of trying to create something that is going to be of value for the client, meet one of their needs, and something that can be feasibly done in the scope of a very short-term engagement over the course of a day, talking 5 or 6 hours. So that is always, it's always difficult, right? It's always not an easy answer to question to design, and it ends up being in very different ways. One that works very well is typically when companies have when there is something where we can draw on the knowledge of the students, and the students are mostly based in the U.S., then a company wants to expand into the U.S. and some ideas about that. That's something where the students can provide a lot of value. So it's a relatively easy. And by contrast, something that could be very difficult, and therefore I would probably try to stay away from, are business questions that require heavy knowledge of the country of the company, because there it's difficult to see the students being able to provide a lot of value, at least on a very short-term basis. So if it was something, say, about, imagine a go-to-market study, but in the country, in Chile, where you're a consumer products company and you need deep expertise about consumer behavior in Chile, well, that's, let's be realistic, not something where we can do a whole lot. So, for me, it's a matter of my knowledge of the skill set of the students, of what they can bring and their experience that they can bring to bear, and then a combination of that with the kinds of needs of the client or the company, and then finally the time frame of what can be done, how much value we can create in this very limited time frame that the company will appreciate, will value, and at the same time the students also will value the learning that they have obtained from going through that exercise.
And let me add a couple pieces. Hold on just a second, Jeff. One of the things we've also learned is that clients really prefer more the marketing side of it. So what we try to do is try to get at the strategy marketing side rather than the tactical marketing side, because the tactical marketing side really requires them to know a lot about the product, whereas the strategy piece helps them more learning about the business environment. The other thing that we try to do is really have it be where students can use the academic databases. So for example, we've got such incredible databases in our library, and that's a real added value for clients because they often don't have access to those kinds of databases. So we also try to leverage those as well, which helps give some value added to the clients. It's not just about the students ideating, it's also about them gathering research that clients don't necessarily have access to.
Thanks. Actually, I love those answers only because you talk about all the underlying work that goes to make the pedagogy actually rich and important that people outside the industry tend to not know. So I'm just saying kudos. Here's a tactical question. Has the time differences been a challenge? Suppose you got evening programs, and wouldn't having synchronous sessions with a company be difficult? Just how have you dealt with sort of those tactical challenges?
I don't know, Mariana, maybe you have some experience there, or Lloyd.
Yeah, I mean, I could jump in on this one. So we have been doing this with European companies as well as Latin American companies, and naturally the time zone change becomes a bit more difficult. So what we do is a mixture of asynchronous and synchronous sessions. And so you could almost have the CEO present the actual challenge on a presentation, asynchronous recording, but have the Q&A later in the day. And so, and do it vice versa, depending on what time zone, maybe you're coming from Europe or LATAM. And so that way the students have a few hours to presented with the problem, they can start doing the research, and by the time that CEO is in the office at 9 o'clock in the morning, bang, then they'll do a 45-minute Q&A, and then they'll go back to the research again. And we're even doing this with some schools in Australia and New Zealand, where they're presenting the challenge at 11 o'clock at night in one side, and then they're working on it the whole day, and by the time the CEO wakes up the next day, they're presenting it back to them the following day. So yeah, it is a mixture of both asynchronous and synchronous sessions. And just to add as well, to provide a little bit of context to the students, it is important to bring in some other specialists outside of the industry themselves. So you saw on the previous slide that we had a couple of political and economic specialists giving the students a bit of background on Argentina and Chile. Because if they don't understand there's 53% inflation in Argentina, they're going to struggle in that 6 hours to come back with some really good insight. And so we'll try and help out a little bit with these extra specialist speakers, whether it's Mariana Barros or other people like that, to then build that context, and then the students go out and do their research. And then we really depend on experts like Carlos and Jody, and Carlos knows Latin America as well as I do, to provide that other context to the students.
And let me add one more thing. The time difference also becomes just another element of intensity for students to help with their learning, because it sort of shakes them up. We make a lot of assumptions about time zones, you know, especially the US-based students. And so this really shakes them up in that way too. It's like, oh, wait, how is this going to work? And so we use that as an element of the learning.
Perfect. What has your success rate been with clients? And I don't know if this is directed towards Austral or to Suffolk, but you know, how many clients end up not providing an engaging, quality, challenging learning experience for students?
Oh wow, I can speak for my Carlos. Maybe you can speak for you. I would say we always. I mean, maybe we have one client out of 7 that is mediocre, but I really find that, see, comes back to the pre-work point that you made earlier, Jeff. Like, you know, we're working on these courses 6 months ahead of time because we're trying to figure it all out and plan it all. So there's so much legwork that happens up front that we try to really get that out of the system. So I don't feel like we really run into that. Carlos, what do you think?
Sure. I would say the same, Jody. I want to give Austral a chance to chime in as well, but from my point of view, I would totally agree with you. I think the sort of failure rate, I think, is very low, very occasional, because of all the work that goes before. Exactly, that's the reason.
I'd say that the two challenges is that every now and again there may be a C-level position that just moves companies, and that's where we have to pivot, and you have to then have a secondary person, and so we always have a number 2 high-level manager who's a backup project liaison. That's really key. I'd say we've had it on the other side, Jeff, that sometimes the project is a little too technical, and that's maybe where, you know, we've really got to do our due diligence on the industry, and is it a software that requires really good knowledge of AI, and et cetera, and so that's where Mariana's team has to do that matching from day one, and just make sure that the age group of the students and the profile of the students and their skill sets can match the project. And every now and again we might find some projects that may require a little bit more technical knowledge, and you know, as a company we're thinking, can we bring engineering students in the future with the MBA students to combine on some of these more tech focused company projects, because yeah, that's a whole different element, and maybe there's an opportunity there to combine skill sets. But I'd say, yeah, it's very rare that we'll have a project that just falls completely flat on its head, and it's, yeah, almost never happens.
And if
we'll be the guinea pig for that, Lloyd.
Pardon?
I said we'll be the guinea pig for that.
Brilliant.
I'm writing this down, Judy.
That's okay with me. That sounds really fun. I would love to do that as one of our classes.
But just to mention that even before the matching process as well, we do a lot of due diligence on our end. So anytime a new partner or a new project arrives in our educational platform, the experiential learning team will go through this project and will reach out to the company to really understand what they're looking for, what are their needs, to make sure that we settle expectations on both ends. And so we are very proud to say that we do have very good projects because of that, because of all the lab works that we do beforehand. And then when the matching happens, Carlos can attest to that, we have more calls and more communication to really establish what we are going to work on. So
I think that, just one last thing, I think the biggest risk is getting an entrepreneur who think they have more time than they have. And so we've just got to be we almost exaggerate the time commitment that they'll need to do to make sure they're really committed to it from day one. And I think that's, you often have these year 1, year 2 entrepreneurs who say, oh, this is brilliant, I want to get involved in this project. But when it comes to it, can they really dedicate that amount of hours to the student teams? And so that's just part of the due diligence process.
And I can take on my old program manager or director hat. We're saying sometimes things happen, right? And if you're leading a consulting project, you have to deal with those changes. A quick question, how do the fast track challenges have to be within a single country? Can they be across countries?
We did it across Argentina.
Yeah. Yeah, they could be. And so look, there's one example that we're doing at the moment with a Colombian firm, and they're looking at multiple different operations that multinational has in Colombia, Chile, Brazil, I think Spain, and I think United States. And so the business challenge is looking at 5 or 6 markets for one single multinational Colombian firm. And so the students are then being split into a cohort of 24 students is going to be split into multiple teams, 6 teams, let's say, and each one is looking at that market challenge for the same company. And I think there's one team which is then combining all of the different teams' perspectives so they can present it to the board of directors. So yeah, there's lots of different options there to do this across continents.
I actually have several more questions. We're right at the hour. I do know that Jody and Carlos have to go to teach in a few minutes. Do you have a minute or two to go through a couple more questions? We'll try to go fast. If you have, you kind of talked about how you identify companies, but what would happen if a student referred a company?
Actually, I'll talk about that because we have that situation now. I'm like, bring it on. You know, it's totally fine with us. We tend to have more alumni doing it, so current students that graduate and then right after they graduate send us a client. But we've had situations before. It's the hardest part is the upfront expectation setting and negotiation, and what we do is basically have the student be the expert. So the student, because they know that company so well, is the expert in the classroom. And then we still have them, they're part of it. We have them rove around the different teams. There's lots of different ways to do it. But I think what this speaks to is that one of the things I think is really important, and I would love to hear Carlos's point on this, is that we need to have, the professors themselves need to have some flexibility. It makes it fun, but stuff happens and you got to think on your feet. And our professors I know at Suffolk are just incredible at doing this and just taking it on and using it and creating it as a learning moment. So if something happens in the class, you basically say, all right, yeah, what are you going to do about it, right? And it's not like everything has to be perfect. In fact, we don't want it to be perfect because that's part of the learning. I don't know, Carlos, if you want to speak to that at all.
Yeah, no, that's essential. I mean, that's essential, particularly on site. You know, things happen all the time, especially in countries, as Lloyd mentioned. You know, in countries that are not, I don't know, where things are not as predictable as they might be in the U.S. or Western Europe. You have to be very flexible. If you're not flexible, that's a big problem. In fact, it's always for me a teachable moment. You know, when things go wrong in Brazil, for example, and I tell my students, look, you know, if you don't learn flexibility out of this course, then I'm going to, you know, you've got serious issues because you're never going to be able to do business in a country like this effectively if you're not able to adapt. And I've had students who have had real difficulty with that. But also, I would say that part of the flexibility is also about taking suggestions from the students. And I've had, quite a few experiences of working with suggestions either from students or from alumni. And particularly in our case with the alumni, I find that particularly good because it's a great way of engaging with them, and they worked out very well. So it's something that I would definitely highly recommend if it's possible to do that.
Maybe here's a new business opportunity, and I don't know if you're already looking at it. A question about digital internships. Are you looking at that at Suffolk, or is this an Austral opportunity? I'm just adding my own ad lib right there.
Our career services is looking at some of that. We're just trying to explore it and figure it out. I know was a lot that happened in the spring. I don't have the data on me, but I know we did a lot of those.
Yeah, and from Australia side, Jeff, some of the schools who weren't able to fulfill their internships in person because of COVID actually found the consulting projects a good fit for them. So some schools have asked us if these consulting projects can be done on an individual basis, which is certainly something we can consider. But we have used the team consulting as an opportunity for the students to get almost as much work experience as they would do on an internship in person. And so as long as it's a really big, deep scope and it's a challenging project, some schools have found that to be a good alternative for summer months for their students.
There's several great questions, but I don't think we have too much more time. Just so everybody knows that we will get these questions to our panelists so that they can answer them. Several of them were about pricing, so I think that's probably easiest if they're handled directly, and you guys can answer those questions directly to those individuals. But I just want to quickly say thanks to our amazing team. Thanks for all your help in putting this together and willingness to share your experiences during this really challenging times that we've been going through, and exciting times. I mean, we take students to travel almost so that they're more flexible anyway. So this was the ultimate test of flexibility on all of our sides. So it's great to see this quick response, and it's some amazing work that we're doing.